After they made their call, Vince and Matthew just stood there. They stood there at the edge, staring into the shop. They could see blood splatter across the walls, across the benches, across everything. Broken tools everywhere they looked. There's debris all over from things being just torn apart. They wanted to walk in. They wanted to scream in frustration. They wanted to just simply break everything because of how pissed they were. But that's what children's do. And they're definitely too old for that crap. They waited, though impatiently. They waited the few minutes that seemed like hours. They seemed like hours, but they turned into days, standing there waiting as every second dragged forward, at least in their mind. Finally, they showed up. It was part of Matthew's crew, and they arrived in a type of transport vehicle. From the outside, it's a cross between a dump truck, some sort of transport box truck, and a strange sort of repulsor hover car. The sides, both sides, began to open up for easy access as crates and other devices were pulled out. They opened up the box, the crates themselves, and looking down, one could see at least 100 silver balls sitting motionless in perfect row after row after row. Vince recognized these. These are compact versions of the old probes. Old probes that used to be the size of a torso or size of a basketball, but now they're small enough to fly up your nose, which is why the name changed from the original and they call them now booger spheres. A few taps on the control pad and the spheres activated and they began to float up in layer after layer and then taking off, going into the shop themselves, and the blue light from each of them scanning over every single piece, getting as much data as they can. Each area is scanned multiple times by each drone, compiling more and more information with every single scan. Each sensor detecting even more, and it all being compiled into the system on the truck. The booger spheres are originally used for mining, sent down into shafts too narrow, too dangerous for anyone to survey. Or they're more commonly used for search and rescue or maybe recovery. Larger ones are used out in the asteroid field to find any type of lost remnants or a stray or something like that. A stray being a discarded ship or discarded life pod. But today they have a secondary purpose. Everyone stands there and watches the dance of the balls juggling themselves all over the room, occasionally knocking into each other, but seemingly just slowing down for only a split second before moving into areas around, some of them too small for humans to touch, see, or definitely even reach. But they scan everything. As the sensors did this, the crew asked about their patriarch, and the brothers both got very, very quiet. In that moment, they heard an alert go off. Nothing crazy, it was just they had to answer the call coming in, and when they did, they realized it's the youngest sister, the youngest of their generation of children. She was crying, screaming, sobbing, asking about their father, and wanted to know what was going on, what they were doing, what was going on. She was completely in the dark at this point, and she was informed about the father's reconstruction. But reconstruction on that level is going to take a long time. They told her that they had looked into it, talked about the local law enforcement and how completely inept they seemed to be. They told her everything except they did omit some details, but that was just to keep her calm. These were details they didn't actually have answers to. They would just lead to more questions to make her worry, and there's no point in making her worry. All she had to know that the patriarch was alive and he will be okay eventually. They had to let her go as the scanning was still in process and they were waiting for more evidence. They needed something. But before disconnecting, the little sister asked, "Have you contacted our brother? Because if you didn't, I could. No, they both stated in unison, very matter of factly, staring into the hollow screen, not even blinking. That is when their sister realized how interesting this could get, how dangerous and how absolutely bad it could be. She simply signed off, telling them to keep her informed, and just as they disconnected the transmission, the scan completed. You knew that because the balls flew back out of the shop and began to put themselves away, rows after rows, once again lining up absolutely perfect as the data was compiled inside the computer aboard the transport. And this was several hundred terabytes of information that had to be coalesced, correlated, and figured out exactly what was there. Duplicates had to be removed, and on and on. And now they could enter the shop. But before they do, they get on the data pad again, and they send the sensors into and around the house. They need more answers. They need all the answers. As the brothers stepped in, their emotions ran very, very high as they stepped into the shop. One of Matthew's subordinates, a Crax, which was a very empathic species that looks a lot like a small version of a Wendigo. Though it wasn't exposing a skull, the very pale and almost ghostly white fur that was on the deer-like face made it look like it was a skull for sure. His frame only makes him stand about 4 feet 4 inches, not including the horns, of course, and nobody ever counts them. Since he's an empathic species, he actually shivered in fear from what was coming out of the brothers, the rage, the contempt, everything that they didn't show on the outside. He could feel every single bit. As the brothers walked through, they walked through very slowly, allowing their emotions to flood through them, allowing their emotions to make them focus, allowing their calculations to go over every little bit. Their entire spirit was used to simply take it all in. As they stood in the shop, looking at everything, smelling everything, hearing everything, feeling everything, even the slightest movement of air, they are still very careful not to step in the blood. The large amount of blood that's on the floor, still slightly gooey as it hasn't completely solidified yet. The sound echoes through the shop, a signal that the analyzation of the house and everything around it is actually done. They walk out very, very slowly, still trying to keep their emotions in check. And as they do, they can see the booger spheres coming out of the house and over the top and around the sides and simply stack themselves very neatly into the crates, nice and organized. The padded crate is then closed and put away. And that's when the brothers invite everyone inside. They bring a lot of materials with them. Mostly, it's holo displays so they can look at the evidence. They move everything off the dining table and something seems a little off. There's more than one place setting, which was strange. Maybe he was expecting guests, they wonder. But they set everything up and look. As they do, another one of the crewmates, a bestial, wants to get some snacks for everybody and refreshments just to calm everyone down. Not to mention they're going to be staring at these holo monitors for a long time. But just as the holo panels are actually turned on, you simply hear, "Sir? Sir?" Matthew spins around and says, "What is it?" As he looks over at the bestial as they walk in holding a container. "Sir, was your patriarch babysitting?" In his hand, he's holding a container, and everyone can see what it is. It's marked right there on the container. It's half empty, full of jinx juice. This beverage is reserved only for young Imixor. Most people can't stomach it. Even though excessively nutritious, it tastes absolutely horrible, like a mixture of diarrhea, vomit, and whatever falls out of a busted engine. It's just disgusting. However, this particular fluid is required for any young, as in baby, Imixor to grow. If they don't have this, their growth will be stunted, mostly mental, but also physical. Both the brothers looked at each other, looked back at it, and simultaneously go, "What the fuck? What the hell?" They began to examine the data on top of this. Most of the blood was, in fact, their father's, which everybody knew that was it. However, not all of it. Mixed in was multiple species. They found that there was Imixor blood in it. Everybody thought about the Imixor. They're a very humanoid species, renowned for their beauty because of the color of the skin itself and the fact that it's so damn smooth. And they just look, well, nice. They're usually also very, very, very smart. But they're also a non-violent species, as their bodies just cannot handle the physical exertion. To look at one, you would almost think as a reptilian for a moment, but you would see that again, it's skin, not scale. The light green in color is actually to blend into the natural environment of their homeworld. They would actually hide from their predators, not fight them. This was important. They also found blood of a cax, just like the crewmate on the other side of the hollow panel that looks like a Wendigo. Of course, they all looked at him when they said cax, and he looked up and said, "Well, it wasn't me." Then they look at the scanners again. They also find Orinifo, a large feline species with multiple tails used for grasping and manipulating. One would look at one and think it's just a tabby cat that's really, really big. They're usually very fast and mainly rely as an ambush predator. However, if you wanted to move something small and you wanted to move something that was delicate, you always have one of these. There was also Anton blood in there. Anton are a 4-foot tall walking tortoise. Although much faster than a tortoise themselves, usually they're used as engineers or some sort of laborers, as they are very strong and extremely durable. You would see them mainly in mines as well, because if there is some sort of cave-in for any reason, they would just hide in their shell and they can wait there sometimes for months before somebody digs them out. There's also blood of Ashwoon. This species is one that made everybody just kind of shiver a little bit. A species that is covered in different tentacles, and that's mainly what people try to joke about when they deal with them. These tentacles are nothing like aquatic species. There's no suckers. These tentacles are just long and smooth, with a kind of wider edge right at the tip, used to make sure it locks in if it needs to. One of these would always stand about 6 feet tall, 16 different tentacles out of the body, and honestly, without his tentacles, it looks like a giant turd. Yet, it's very well known for using those tentacles in certain images, in certain recordings, the kind of recordings that no one admits to actually watching. Although for most, it's so disturbing to watch that they only watch once. There was also blood of an elitens, a small, if you consider about 5.5 feet small for an insectoid species. They're extremely strong, really fast, but they have very low birth rates, at least outside their homeworld, meaning that their numbers are very low, which means it was surprising to actually know of one this far out. Their homeworld is at least 10 sectors away. All these different blood types were something that made everybody curious. However, the last one made everyone pause. It was a samuk, a large reptilian species, usually standing about 7 feet tall before it stands all the way up. One would look at it and confuse it for a walking raptor. However, no feathers, no tail. Very, very wide means a lot of muscle mass, and very big claws. Also very nasty. They're not ones who stick around very often. It's also rare to see them around, however, not totally uncommon. This was a very strange mix, and then they looked at what else might be around. They checked the presence of different compounds, and sure enough, they found burned carbon, burned plasma, both synthetic and natural. Vince told them to pause. He had to check something. And he checked his father's personal effects, as in the clothing that he was wearing when they brought him into the hospital. He looked, and sure enough, there it was. Holster without a pistol, and a sheath without a blade. When he said this, everybody realized something. This confirmed that he did not go down without a fight. He hurt them. He hurt them bad. That's when they started reaching in and checking the hospital records around the entire colony, checking them against any of the potential aggressors. And it came up negative. They checked again, and sure enough, negative. Nothing was coming up. Okay, so they didn't go to the hospital to get themselves patched up. Well, that's not uncommon by any stretch. Then they checked the recyclers for any sudden deposits of organics. These were the colony's versions of a morgue. They just had a less, morbid name, and also the fact that morgue means something else in a few other languages. Sometimes it's actually funny. However, when they checked the recyclers, turns out positive. Checking the records, they could see that a single cax was left at the doorstep. When those who worked at the recyclers actually showed up and checked what it was, turns out that this cax was missing both arms, appeared to be beaten down. One of the arms actually kind of half stuck into the head. The antlers were actually snapped off at the roots, which everybody knew had to be excessively painful. Though they shed off, if you snap them off beforehand, it's like ripping someone's ear off twice. However, that's not the worst part, and that is not what ended it. No, the antlers were somewhere else. They were shoved right into its chest. One antler actually destroying one of the hearts completely, and the other one shoved in so deep that all four of the lungs had been punctured. This thing had died not from the heart being damaged, but it choked to death on its own blood. They checked to see its ID, and there wasn't any. No ID on it, no ID registry, no explanation, and no one is claiming it. They checked the DNA. Maybe there's a match for the blood. If there was, they have a lead. Then they found it. They found a match to it. One time, this one was registered in a single sector over. They knew who this was, and this means they had a lead. Hacking in, they started checking for any type of known associates. And unfortunately, the list was fairly short, but nothing was matching up. But as they looked, they realized that everyone on that list was known criminals, all of them under suspicion or already imprisoned. However, none of them actually matched up, and the only one that seemed to come close had no current warrants, which means no current address, no place to find them. However, this is when everybody looked at each other and they mentioned how it's a fun mixture of species. Everybody knew what this meant. Saying mixture of species was something that everyone in that room understand, because there is a simple truth in the stars. Humans use the same phrase, birds of a feather flock together, which means the species stay with the same species a lot, almost all the time. Not just for familiarity, but a lot of times for protection. There's only two main times you would find mixed groups, especially heavily mixed groups, and that is in ship crews and criminals. As everybody started cross-referencing this dead cax with anything they could find, there was an alert at the door. They had company. It wasn't though they had to worry. The alert is what everybody calls the doorbell now. They opened the door and surprised to see the constable standing there. He simply said hello before he went on to his rant. I have been informed that you are attempting to investigate. My chain of command has informed me that you are breaking the local ordinance by doing so. All investigations need to be performed by enforcement personnel like myself. If you continue, we will have no choice but to detain you and confiscate your property. Do you understand? He said this as motioning to the vehicle out front, a vehicle that was probably worth more than that constable's entire yearly salary. Before Vince could say anything, because he was about to lose his mind, Matthew simply stepped in between and asked, "Do you have a warrant, Constable?" "This is an ordinance. We are not required to have one. I do not have one on myself." "Then cite the ordinance," Matthew said. The constable, getting angry, "This is an order. You will comply with it." Matthew, standing straight and knowing the law, says, "This colony was settled by humans. The laws we settle with are universal in every single human colony. If you do not have a legal warrant in hand, nor can you cite the ordinance, then you have no business here, and you are currently trespassing. So, by law, remove yourself immediately. Have a nice day, Constable." The constable tried to say something, and he simply said, "Have a nice day, Constable." And then he slammed the door before turning around, screaming, "Freaking bureaucrats! Oh, I hate these guys." One of the crew members then spoke up, this time a young Shep, which was a canine species that is, well, very human in appearance. The only thing that makes them look different is the dog ears, tail, and of course, their feet. He simply says, "Just like all the rest, huh, Captain?" Vince turns and looks at his brother and says, "You deal with them a lot?" Matthew says, "In my business, there's always somebody trying to pull something nefarious. And, wow, it's just far too often, so you'll learn." Heading back to the evidence, they began to look over everything, and they now have, at least partially, who. At least they have one. There's a lot of different ones there. So they have to find out the rest of the who. But before that, or at the same time, they have to figure out why. Why did this happen? And something stuck out. Something that they didn't notice at first, and then they saw it. Something they should have checked beforehand, but they hadn't yet. It was in the blood. What biosex are they? Some species, very few, have hermaphrodites. However, you don't see them in this sector, ever. So it's not going to be an issue. However, this is going to be a key piece. They began to go through every single one of the blood samples, and the blood showed multiple DNA strands from Emexor blood. They were surprised. Wait a second, that doesn't make sense. They wouldn't be part of this. They're too fragile. They looked close, and there was 3 different strands. 2 female, 1 male. They looked to see where all this was found, finding a map of the shop and of the house, and it turns out most of these are droplets from inside the house, as though somebody was trying to get away, but they were injured at the time, or got injured while running away, which is why the house was tore up so bad. There was also epithelial cells all over the place. When they focused on epithelial cells, they realized something. There was epithelials everywhere. In the latrine, in the bedrooms, at least one of them, on the couch, over at the dining table, in the kitchen. I mean, it was just everywhere. This was strange. They saw these and they tried to match them up. It took a little bit, but they actually got full DNA structures and they began to run them through the DNA database. No matches. That shouldn't be possible. They triple checked. No matches at all. They checked everything they had. There was not a single match in any database they could find. And that made absolutely no sense. This was an agro colony. Everybody needs to register. Because if they don't and they're caught, they run the risk of either immediate deportation, imprisonment, or execution. So why would these not be there? And that's when you heard someone whisper, "Illegal goods." This was a red flag for everybody. Even saying that was enough to make everybody clench their sphincters or whatever type of muscle they have really, really tight. Illegal goods in this context can mean only one thing: slaves. That is when one of the crew members paused before saying this, looking over at Matthew and Vince. Both of them were sitting there with their jaws almost open, but they still asked, "Did your father have slaves?" They looked at each other confused and looked forward and said, "He's not the type." He even offered to re-enter service against the Shenbai when they were doing all their slavery crap with our species. There's only one reason that he actually didn't go in, and that's when he froze, with his brother reaching out, grabbing him on the shoulder, and telling Vince to shut up without telling him to shut up. They thought about this. It wasn't his nature. If he had someone there, he would have said something. They do talk to him every once in a while. Maybe not as much as they would like to, but they do. If he needed help, he's not too proud to call. What the hell was going on? They couldn't figure out what was going on. This was strange. All they knew is that they had just stepped in something very, very deep. And it made them wonder even more, what the hell is going on? Hello, everybody. This is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on part 2 of Mercy is Expensive. And before I go, I need to say that today's winner is Douglas Scarborough. And I also need to send out some gigantic thank yous to the supporters of this channel. And they are Douglas Scarborough, Prozac and Pancakes, Brian Kemp, Erica Gem, MTF Guard, Guardian Sage, SS Demon, and Steve Ewing. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntext.
Ejecting pilot.